واتل ما أوحي إليك من كتاب ربك لا مبدل لكلماته ولن تجد من دونه ملتحدا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue, inshallah ta'ala, with Surah Al-Kahf and verse number 21 in the Surah. Verse number 21 and maybe 22, inshallah ta'ala. Verse number 21 in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وكذلك أعثرنا عليهم ليعلموا أن وعد الله حق وأن الساعة لا ريب فيها إذ يتنازعون بينهم أمرهم فقالوا ابنوا عليهم بنيانا ربهم أعلم بهم قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا. The translation of the ayah. And similarly, we caused them to be found that they who found them would know that the promise of Allah is truth, and that of the hour there is no doubt. That was when they disputed among themselves about their affair and then said, construct over them a structure. Their Lord is most knowing about them. Said those who prevailed in the matter, we will surely take for ourselves over them a masjid. Then the next ayah, سيقولون ثلاثة رابعهم كلبهم ويقولون خمسة سادسهم كلبهم رجما بالغيب ويقولون سبعة وثامنهم كلبهم قل ربي أعلم بعدتهم ما يعلمهم إلا قليل فلا تمار فيهم إلا مراء ظاهرا ولا تستفت فيهم منهم أحدا. They, it means the people, will say there they were three, the fourth of them being their dog, and they will say that they were five, and the sixth of them being their dog, guessing at the unseen, and they will say they were seven, and the eighth of them was their dog. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, my Lord is most knowing of their number. None knows them except a few, so do not argue about them except with an obvious argument, and do not inquire about them among the speculators from anyone. So continuing with the story of Al-Fitya, Ashabul Kahf, the people of the cave, and the test and the trial that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching this ummah that your deen, the religion, is the most important and the most valuable to be protected, to be guarded, even if a person is in state as the people of the cave. They did not find any place to seek refuge, not for the protection of their own lives, but for the protection of their own deen, to be faithful and strong and steadfast upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the previous verses that talked about many different benefits, if you remember from the Tafseer of Imam Sa'di rahimahullah. Then after this, in this ayah number 21, وَكَذَلِكَ أَعْثَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ لِيَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. So this is, as he says here, يخبر تعالى أنه أطلع الناس على حال أهل الكهف. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing that he made the people, الناس, أطلع الناس. He made the people get to see. And al-ittila' is when you look at something, when you look from above onto something. And also it's a word that is used for looking into books, for example. You look from above. So أنه أطلع الناس, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the people see the state and the affairs of the people of Al-Kahf. وَكَذَلِكَ أَعْثَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ, that means they were found, they were known by the people at their time after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala awakened them from their sleep. وَذَلِكَ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ, he says, and that is because by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, بعدما استيقظوا, after they woke up, وبعثوا وبعثوا أحدهم, and they sent one of them, يشتري لهم طعاما, to buy for them food, وأمروه بالاستخفاء والإخفاء, because they commanded him بالاستخفاء, to make himself hidden, والإخفاء, and to hide himself. فأراد الله أمرا فيه صلاح للناس. They wanted to be the affairs to be hidden, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed something else. أراد الله أمرا فيه صلاح للناس. In this matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed, there is salah, there is uprightness and goodness for the people. وزيادة أجر لهم, an increase in the rewards of the people of the cave. وهو, what is this? أن الناس رأوا منهم آية من آيات الله, that the people saw from them a sign from the signs of Allah. المشاهدة بالعيان, the signs of Allah that people can see with their own eyes. المشاهدة, the ones that are being seen. المشاهدة with a fatha here, for the ones to be witnessed. بالعيان, with oneself, with one's eyes. What is this ayah? على أن وعد الله حق لا شك فيه, that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth and there's no doubt about it whatsoever. ولا مرية, and there's no ambiguity in it whatsoever. The promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. وهو أن الناس, he says, ولا بعد بعد ما كانوا, ولا مرية ولا بعد. And also there is no, it's not far from being attained or from being reached, meaning the promise of Allah. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised something, that means he's, of course, he's the creator of the heavens and the earth. And this promise of Allah, or the promises of Allah that are mentioned in the wahi from Allah, is a test. Because some people believe in it and some people disbelieve in it. And it's going to happen. So those who believe in it, they see then at the time when the wa'd, when the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is established, then they rejoice and their rewards are given. Versus those who disbelieved in the promise of Allah, and as a result of that, they did not act upon what this promise is. So بعدما كانوا, so after they were يتنازعون بينهم أمرهم, after they were in dispute in their matters, now the matter becomes very clear to them. فمن مثبت للوعد والجزاء, some of them they would affirm, confirm the promise and the recompense. ومن ناف له, and some ناف from النفي, some would deny it. فجعل قصتهم زيادة بصيرة. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made their story زيادة بصيرة, increase in the basira, increase in the proper vision of seeing things beyond the apparent and what they see with their own eyes. ويقين, an increase in the yaqeen, in the certainty, للمؤمنين, to the believers. وحجة على الجاحدين, and it becomes hujjah, evidence established against the deniers, those who deny the truth and the ayat and the signs from Allah. And as you know, this matter of seeing what the messengers had promised the people with, that negates the subject of al-iman, because al-iman is about al-iman bil-ghayb. But there is signs like this that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send to humanity and for people to see, so that would increase, as we heard, their yaqeen, their certainty, establish their faith. So, but for the believers, the wa'd of Allah, as if they are seeing it with their own eyes. There's no differences when it comes to their actions. It's a level of goodness in the heart, as Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى, when he wanted to see how that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give life to the dead. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Ibrahim alayhi salam, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. That means, have you not believed? He said, I believed, of course. But for my heart to reach that level, it's a higher level of certainty when something is seen with one's eyes. Not that he has weaknesses in his iman. His iman is perfect. His iman is completed, because the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. But to see something after heard about it is completely different level. Not in the actions, not in the iman, but in what the heart would witness and taste. And as mentioned before, the example of anything that you never seen before, but you know for sure that it's there. A fruit that you never tasted it or seen it in your life, but people talk about it. Many people, for example, they did not see a certain fruit, right? You heard of it, mangoes, for example, right? And then when you see it as something else, when you taste it, it's completely different experience, even if they describe to you how it tastes and things like this. So فَجَعَلَ قِصَّتَهُمْ زِيَادَةً بَصِيرَةٍ وَيَقِينٍ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, increase in the basira, the proper vision, and the certainty for the believers, وَحُجَّةً عَلَى الْجَاحِدِينَ, and hujjah, clear evidence is established upon the jahideen, the deniers. وَصَارَ لَهُمْ أَجْرُ هَذِهِ الْقَضِيَّةِ, and also for them another benefit, that the reward for them because of this matter becomes for them. Al-Qadiyya is the case. وَشَهَّرَ اللَّهُ أَمْرَهُم. Shahar with a fatha, with a shadda here. That means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed their, or spread their affairs. Shahara. And the word shahar or tashhir, sometimes it's used in a negative way. If someone, disclose a matter that's supposed to be secret from a human being to a human being. And here it's mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spread their news. They did want it to be spread. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that decreed that for a reason. وَشَهَّرَ اللَّهُ أَمْرَهُم. Like the ulama of the ummah and the early generations of Islam, when they would take all the means to protect themselves and to be away from being known and to be famous. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for them to be very famous. But in themselves, they don't want, they were not seekers of this. As one of the early generations of Islam, I believe Abdullah bin Mubarak, when he said, بُثَّ الْعِلْمِ وَاحْذَرِ الشُّهْرَةِ. Spread the knowledge, but be warned against fame. And from it is ash-shuhra, which is fame. So وَشَهَّرَ اللَّهُ أَمْرَهُم, he made them famous. وَرَفَعَ قَدْرَهُم, and he elevated their level and their status. حَتَّى عَظَّمَهُمُ الَّذِينَ اطَّلَعُوا عَلَيْهِمْ, till those who looked at them, they made ta'zeem of them, they exalted them. And they said, أُبْنُوا عَلَيْهِمْ بُنْيَانًا, build on top of them a structure. He says, Allahu a'lamu bihalihim wa ma'alihim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best about their state and their outcome. وقال من غلب على أمرهم وهم الذين لهم الأمر وبنوا عليهم بنيانا ربهم أعلم بهم. The Lord knows them, know their affairs best, or their situation now and their outcome at the end. قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم. Those who غلبوا, they defeated others. Basically, it refers to the people who have authority. الذين لهم الأمر لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا. We will make on them masjid. He says, أي نعبد الله تعالى فيه, that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it, ونتذكر به أحوالهم, and to remember their affairs in it, وما جرى لهم, and what happened to them. وهذه الحالة محظورة نهى عنها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وذم فاعلها. This state, this matter is محظورة, is forbidden. And the Prophet ﷺ forbade such a thing in the many ahadith, that forbidding the Muslims from building a masajid on top of the graves. And there's no doubt about this whatsoever. And not just taking the spot of the grave as a place of sujood. No, the wordings of the hadith are very clear. Never to build a masjid on top of a grave. And he said, ﷺ, these people are the worst of evil. Because he says, أولئك شرار الخلق إذا مات الرجل الصالح فيهم بنوا على قبره مسجدا. They are the worst evil people, because when a righteous man dies among them, they would build بنوا, not just take it as a place of sujood. No, they would build on top of his grave a masjid. So this is forbidden, no doubt. And whoever takes this verse as an evidence for them to approve building a masjid on a grave or to pray in a grave, right? This is desires and not seeking evidences. As we know, the principles of the people of Ahl Sunnah when seeking evidences, they don't make a decision and then they look for an evidence. These people already did these actions and they like these actions, and they like building masajid on top of the graves, and they like to go ask the dead in the grave. This is already decided by them. So let's find an evidence to support this. So they would twist and make things seem to be according to what they believe. The people of Ahl Sunnah, they take evidences first and then they act. So this is never an evidence. This is narrating a story happened. It does not, as he says here, وَلَا يَدُلُّ ذِكْرُهَا هُنَا عَلَى عَدَمِ ذَمِّهَا. Just for the fact that is mentioned, it's not in a context where it says, or an evidence that mentioning it, that means it's not condemned. It's just stating what they did. It's not disapproving or approving what they've done whatsoever. Who said that? قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم. Actually, as it might be mentioned, I think we lost the connection. طيب, can you see now? طيب. طيب, hopefully inshallah that where we stopped is لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا, and we heard the arguments that this is as the ayah does not state it's not an evidence that this is something to be approved if those who take it as an evidence of building a masajid on top of the graves, because we have the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ forbidding that, and we heard the hadith. And even to add to this is that those who said let's build a masjid on them are the الذين غلبوا على أمرهم, the people of authority, which it refers to the fact that they are just having power. So it gives an evidence of the opposite, that this is something that is not a good thing to be done. It did not say the believers said this. And he says here, فإن السياق في شأن أهل الكهف والثناء عليهم. The context here in the affairs of the people of the cave and praising them. وأن هؤلاء وصلت بهم الحال, and these people that the state reached them, they reached a state إلى أن قالوا, till they said أبنوا عليهم مسجدا, build on top of them a masjid. بعد خوف أهل الكهف الشديد من قومهم, after the people of the cave they feared their people intense fear من قومهم, وحذرهم من الاطلاع عليهم, and how they were warned against and protecting themselves from being looked onto them or discovered. فوصلت الحال إلى ما ترى, so the affairs reached in such a state. So he says, so before we mention the benefit here in the story, as you see here, so وكذلك أعثرنا عليهم ليعلموا أن وعد الله حق. So this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made their affairs to be disclosed. They made them famous, and their story is famous, so that they know, the people would know that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. And as some of the early generations of Islam, they said they were disbelieving in the hereafter, the disbelievers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a sign for them to see the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the matter for him is for him to say, for it to be, and it becomes. So, and that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا, and the hour there's no doubt about it whatsoever. The same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept their bodies, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would resurrect those who die. إِذْ يَتَنَازَعُونَ بَيْنَهُمْ أَمْرَهُمْ فَقَالُوا بُنُوا عَلَيْهِمْ بُنْيَانًا. So when they were disputing with one another with regards to building a structure on top of them. And whether the ummah or the nation that they were resurrected or they were awakened at a time when people were believers, so for them to see clearly with their own eyes that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. And when those who had doubt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a sign for them. And also, إِذْ يَتَنَازَعُونَ بَيْنَهُمْ أَمْرَهُمْ. That means when they were يَتَنَازَعُونَ, they were disputing with one another whether they are approving or believing in the resurrection versus those who disbelieved in it. And whether people, they were knowing something about the cave, but they were so scared to go there, or versus they didn't know. So فَقَالُوا بُنُوا عَلَيْهِمْ بُنْيَانًا رَبُّهُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِهِمْ. The Lord knows best about their affairs. And it was said that they died afterwards. They did not live long afterwards. It was just a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed the people. So قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا. Imam السعدي رحمه الله, he says, وفي هذه القصة دليل على أن من فر بدينه من الفتن سلمه الله منها. This is such a great benefit that is worth this entire world and whatever it contains. من فر بدينه من الفتن. Whoever flees from the fitan for his deen, and put 100 lines under بدينه, that he fled from the fitan not for the sake of his physical being, not for a better life, not for anything. It's only for the sake of his deen, to protect his religion, to save his religion from the fitan. Because the fitan, as the people of the cave they mentioned, either they will harm you physically or they make you turn away from the deen. And that means وَلَن تُفْلِحُوا إِذًا أَبَدًا. That means you would never be successful in this case. فإنهم إن يظهروا عليكم يرجموكم أو يعيدوكم في ملتهم. And as we talked about that before, أو يعيدوكم في ملتهم. This is what the believers they fear the most. That they might, the disbelievers, make them return to their evil religion. And if they are also preventing them from practicing their religion, the most important thing in life. So when the evil ones prevent the believers from practicing their religion, from establishing their deen, then the believers should find a place where they're able to practice their deen. This is al-firar bid-deen, to be able to practice the deen, not to be able to live a goodly life. So man farra bid-deen, whoever is sincere in this, fleed with his religion from al-fitan, sallamahu Allah minha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will save his deen for him. He'll save his deen for him. وَأَنَّ مَنْ حَرَصَ عَلَى الْعَافِيَةِ عَافَاهُ اللَّهُ. And whoever is eager to be having al-afiyah, the strength in matters of deen, عَافَاهُ اللَّهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him the strength. وَمَنْ أَوَى إِلَى اللَّهِ. And whoever seek refuge in Allah, أَوَاهُ اللَّهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be his refuge. وَجَعَلَهُ هِدَايَةً لِغَيْرِ. And he would make him guidance to others. As you see, this is the ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. But you have to take your step. You have to make your move. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. And the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. And all of what you see here, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sallamahu, afahu, awahu. These things are outcome to what? Sallamahu here, even in the words of the tafseer. Farra, he fled with his religion for the sake of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him. He is eager to have the strength in one's religion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him strength in his religion. He sought refuge in Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be his refuge. And more beyond what a person expects. Not just even what a person expects, beyond what he expects, like the people of the cave. They never thought that even in their, as they say, their wildest dream, that this will happen to them. So that we are till today reading about them. So if that happened when there are just few number of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw what's in their hearts. They talked to one another and they acted simple actions. They did not change the world at their time. They did not invent anything that would make the life of the people this or that. But how they reached this level is all because of the al-firar bid-deen, to save the religion. It's about the religion. It's not about the individuals. And if I might add something here when it comes to ourselves, even with how things are with callers to the deen and people talking about the deen and the da'wah this and the da'wah that, it's not about your da'wah. It's not about your benefit to the people. It's the benefit of the deen. So the deen is not this group or that group, or this masjid versus another masjid. And the sign of a person is being successful is that he has more followers or his da'wah is successful. It's the da'wah to the deen of Allah. It's the concern of the deen of Allah. So it's not about anything else. So it's not a personal matter. It's the deen of Allah that a person has to be sincerely calling to and protecting it and taking the means to preserve the deen and nothing but the deen. So therefore, when people are complaining, and I've been receiving that all the time with regards to, people are talking against each other, dua and things like this, and is it a personal issue or it's because of the deen of Allah? If it's for the deen of Allah, nobody will be upset with anyone else. If someone, even if he did it in the wrong way, warned against this and mentioned bad things about that person and so on, is the concern the individuals or the deen? If it's the deen, then who cares if a person is warned against even? He's doing the deen for the sake of Allah. So if people warn against him, if people turn away from him, this does not decrease anything of his rewards. But what concerns him is, what if he's doing something wrong? What if he's deviated from the ways of the truth? So it's all about, again, the deen of Allah. This is what we need to preserve, and this is what we need to have, that sincerity, and not to mix it with other things, especially when it comes to matters of fitan. Of course, a human being, if he faces fitan, he wants the deen and the dunya. Nothing wrong with having also the comfort of this life. But what's the concern is the concern of the deen that is never to be challenged. He says, وَمَنْ تَحَمَّلَ الذُّلَّ فِي سَبِيلِهِ. Whoever is patient and carried the burden of الذُّل. الذُّل is humiliation, but في سبيله, for the sake of the deen. وَابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ, and seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because otherwise, what's the immediate joy of this life? If he compromises deen, maybe he will be praised. Maybe they would get him into the highest level of status and wealth and so on. But that's not done for the deen, it's for his own self. وَمَنْ تَحَمَّلَ الذُّلَّ فِي سَبِيلِهِ وَابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِهِ كَانَ آخِرُ أَمْرِهِ. Then the last of his affairs, وَعَاقِبَتُهُ, and the end of it, الْعِزَّ الْعَظِيم, the great honor. مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ, from where does he not expect whatsoever. وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ خَيْرٌ لِلْأَبْرَارِ, and what's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is best to the righteous ones. So, and that's why these stories, it shows us the ways on the face of earth. Look at the prophets of Allah. They were not the elite among their people. They were not the people in charge, meaning they have the authority and they have the armies and they kill and they shed blood and they do whatever they want. They were for the weak and the oppressed, and they were standing firm upon the truth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the outcome at the end for them is something beyond what they would ever expect. So this is a repeated way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because only the foolish ones, the ones with weak iman, they would follow the power, the wealth, the physical strength, and they become forgetful of the truth and the ultimate truth, which has nothing to do with wealth and power and who's in charge and who's powerful or whatever there is. This is only for the foolish ones. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Fir'aun, فَاسْتَخَفَّ قَوْمَهُ فَأَطَاعُوهُ إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمًا فَاسِقِينَ. That means Fir'aun, he belittled his people, so they followed him. So, but the people of Musa alayhi salam, look at their affairs, and they are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with. So to be on the side of the truth, regardless, to save your religion, regardless, then the outcome of it is for sure. And this is the promise of Allah. The outcome, the end, is definitely the best beyond one's expectations or what a person ever imagined. So if a person doesn't learn from the story of the people of the cave such a lesson that makes the person then change his entire life, not once in a while, that a person would not just know things, but rather his actions will change. He repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from things that challenged his religion because of worldly gain. He thinks that if he compromise the deen of Allah, he can make more money, people will be pleased with him, they would do this or that. This is all a test here and an example for people to learn that our actions has to change. We have to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to focus always so that we don't forget these meanings, because the heart changes. So we need to make sure that the heart is always upon this. Instead of, because I know that some people might ask these questions, I didn't look at the questions yet, but instead of asking, what's the name of the people of the cave? Does that mean that they died afterwards? How long did they live after they discovered their affairs? And the people, when they saw them, what did they do to them? These types of details, what kind of food did they eat? What's the name of the king? Right? And what happened? Because there's all kinds of stories that, whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter to us. Right? Does not increase one's iman. If a person come across it and read it or whatever, that's fine, without believing it or denying it. But the Quran gives us the best qasas, the best stories, for us to understand exactly what is meant by us. And this is the concern. What is for us to do based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in this story. And then after that, it talks about what people say. سَيَقُولُونَ ثَلَاثَةٌ رَابِعُهُمْ كَلْبُهُمْ. They would say there were three, their fourth is their dog, five, their sixth is their dog. رَجْمًا بِالْغَيْبِ. and الرجم is to stone something, with al-ghaib, with unseen. But because of the importance of this next ayah, and every verse is important, but I would rather keep it to the next session, inshallah ta'ala, because it also has great lessons that affect our life and our speech, and to make us really, this surah is a life-changing surah. Every surah is like this, but it's a surah that, and it's an authentic hadith that we recited every Jumu'ah, and it's meant to be that way. So all the different levels of fitna, the fitna of the deen, the trial of the deen, the trial of the wealth, the trial of knowledge, the trial of power, all of that is mentioned in the surah. So whoever is saved from these fitan, he's a successful one. And the first and the most important, and the one that the surah is named after, is with regards to fitnatud deen, al-fitna fid deen. And this is the job of Iblis, that is constantly working on this to take people away from the deen. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our hearts from any deviation, and to keep us steadfast upon the deen of Allah. طيب, we'll stop here inshallah, then we can continue tomorrow inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. If you have any questions, please go ahead inshallah. Can you understand from this ayah that initially they built a building commemorating the miracle of Allah, then over time the people took this building as a place of worship and started to do shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Like how shirk started in the first place, they first made pictures of people who worshipped Allah best, and then over time they took them as partners to Allah. Regardless whether this is what happened or not, but this is always the ways of Iblis to get people to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, whether it's the call was to build a structure for them to be known as marking them. And then it is in the same time where the king, the one in charge, he wanted to, as some of the Israeliyat would says, that he wanted to bury them in a box made of gold and things like this. And he saw someone in his dream, no, don't do this, just keep him in the dust. And some things might be approved, some things might be not permissible, right? Because this is, again, we have in our deen matter is very clear and it's straightforward. And mentioning what the people did, it does not mean that this is approved. And as Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, if you look into the Tafseer Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, and the Tafseer of this ayah, he mentioned that as a result of that, there is masail mamnu'a wa ja'iza. There are forbidden masail and there are permissible ones. So اتخاذ المساجد على القبور, to make masajid on the qubur, on the graves, to pray in it, to build on it, all of that is, the sunnah is very clear that this is forbidden. And the hadith he mentioned, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and mentioned how these are the most evil people. So this is no doubt about this whatsoever. And whoever, this is one of the tests also, and one of the clear ways, really one of the clarity in the matters of the deen, is that if you see someone believing in these things, that it's okay to pray in a masjid that has a grave, that they go call upon the grave, or ask the person in the grave, do this and do that, that means what? Run away from such an individual. You don't learn deen from him. The matter becomes clear. There are clear signs that this is not according to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they twist evidences here and there. So whether it happened in the same incident or over time, but the matter with over time, this is a true concept here, that Iblis has, he, as they say, he takes his time, and for the matter to be well established, the evil. So it doesn't come from the first step to say worship other than Allah, just commemorate their memories, right? And then after some time, when the ilm decreases, as the story of the initially how the shirk is committed, then people then start to seek blessings, and then one step after the other till they worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because it seems like they were debating, and then the people of authority, they said this. Now, so instead of thinking that we are benefiting others, we keep in mind that we are serving the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ahsant, na'am. This is exactly what it is. And it's very tricky, right? Because if a person says, oh, my da'wah is this, no, it's not your da'wah. It's the deen of Allah. It's and the same thing. If someone, for example, if someone of knowledge said something about a group that they have this and that wrong in them, what happened normally? The group will get angry, right? And they will have videos refuting what the alim says because he attacked their group. Is their group the religion of Islam? So instead, they should reflect upon themselves, and they should, maybe what is said is wrong, maybe what is said is right. And the concern is the deen of Allah. So the people to know the truth about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not about how they are the individuals to be followed for them to save the religion of Allah. Right? And that's why you would find the ulama always refer to those who before them. Follow, as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he said, "Man kana mustannan falyastanna biman qad mat, fa inna al-hayya la tu'min alayhi al-fitna." Whoever wants to follow, follow those who passed away, because the one that is alive, the fitna, he's never safe from it. People can change. So don't make your religion based on individuals that are alive that you can see them changing, but rather follow those who passed away. And how would you follow someone that passed away? By the people of knowledge that are present, those who would refer to those who passed away. It's a lineage, as we said, and it doesn't mean, of course, that you don't learn from those who are present. Alhamdulillah, the khair, the goodness in the ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us, inshallah. طيب آمين. Barakallahu fikum. طيب stop here, continue inshallah ta'ala next time. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.